Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final part of our summer 2021 series of LD Edge Chat. We are obviously being joined by Andrew Ball today. We'll be talking about how we can demonstrate leadership skills and kind of blend in some of the stuff that we can learn from sport within leadership in education. As with all of our sessions, you'll find that they're recorded and hosted on our YouTube page. If you search on YouTube for Chiltern Teaching School Hub, you'll find all of our previous sessions and the content that we've been producing. If you want to engage with today's session, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen that you'll have a Q&A tab that will enable you to answer or ask any questions, engage with Andrew as we come to sort of the later part of today's session. Join us on Twitter as well if you want to use the hashtag LDEdgeChat. You can follow us at Children Teaching School Hub or at Children Learning Trust. You'll find plenty of communication around there. Without much further hold up, I'm going to pass over to Andrew, who will be presenting on leadership lessons from sports.
Hello there, welcome to this session this afternoon on leadership lessons in sport as part of Elder EduChat. My name's Andrew Bull, I'm the head teacher at Cardinal Newman Catholic School in Luton. I think before we start, it's just worthwhile saying that I love sport. I love watching it, I love participating, I still pretend to play sport as well. But one of the things that I like most about sport is that I'm fascinated about how leaders in sport manage to get groups of players, groups of athletes, to go all in the same direction and achieve great things. And they use the tools that they have, and how they do this is what really interests me. So this afternoon, during this session, I want to take you through some of the different thoughts I have, and from all the reading, from the different areas that I've studied and looked at, in order to explore what we can learn from sport as being better leaders. So let's start with sport and today. Sport features in every part of our life. The language that we use, the way we speak, we use phrases like it's a game of two halves. We talk about a sticky wicket when it's a tough situation. If we've done something and thought of something a bit strange, we say it's from way out left field, or we drop the ball if we forget something. Maybe we achieve something, we're first past the post, or hands down, we've done the best job that we can. Or maybe it was below the belt, or a low blow in a way that we respond, or just par for the course, or even certain situations get me totally stumped. These are all expressions we use, and I think it just demonstrates how sport has intertwined itself into our life and is an intrinsic part of what we are and what we do. So let me start by thinking about why sports leaders, why athletes, why coaches really are able to achieve great things and what we can learn from them. And I think part of what sport demonstrates to me is that we have a goal, that a team often has a goal. Maybe it wants to get promotion and stay up. Maybe it wants to win the cup, qualify for Europe, be undefeated for the season. Maybe not to concede any points or goals, to get some medals at the Olympics, maybe to beat a particular time or to make the playoffs. And I think when we start this whole process of looking at leadership and lessons we can learn from sport in our own leadership, I think it's good for us to look at what is our goal. Is our goal clear? If we have a clear goal, it requires leadership. I think in order to achieve that goal, we need to create vision, engage with it, and communicate it. These are all things that I think sport does exceptionally well, and I don't think that education should not have, actually. So for this afternoon, I'm going to be looking at these points. I'm going to be looking at what we can learn from sport about creating a culture, using data, the amount of data that we use and how we use it in education. What do we need to do to have a goal, to not be limited by anything, to manage the talent that we have? And then I'll have some final thoughts and some reading as well. So let's look at creating the culture. The way that I'm going to do this is by expanding on some different thoughts by some different people. That's all. And this is not the be all and end all of the leadership lessons we can learn from sport, but the ones that I have learned. And I think the ones that I take with me as I try to be a leader within education. So I don't know if you've read this book Legacy. This is James Kerr, who's a journalist, was able to spend some time with the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team. And he spent a significant amount of time with them to see why they are so good. And they went on a massive journey of improvement. And he came up with 15 points. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. I'll let you read the book if you want to. And if you're a rugby fan, it's just a great book to read as well. But these are sort of the 15 steps that James Kerr talks through that the All Blacks use. They sweep the sheds. They develop character. They go for the gap. So when you're doing your very best, you adapt, you change. They play with purpose, sort of why you do what you do. They pass the ball, so that means they develop leaders. They give responsibility to others. They're willing to learn. It says no knuckleheads on the screen there. I think in the book he uses a slightly different phrase. He just wants us to. He just says that the All Blacks work really well together. They're not individuals. They're part of a team. Embrace expectations. They prepare to win. They prepare to be the very best. They keep a blue head, which means they control their attention. They keep very focused on what they're doing. They know themselves. Champions do extra. You know, find something you would die for and give your life to it. And I think in education, sometimes we give everything to education. And I think that's one thing that we do really, really well as leaders. There's some sacrifice. There's the language we use. There's the ritual. He talks about ritualize to actualize, create a culture. He talks about be a good ancestor, which is a really big Maori tradition. They call it the Wakapapa, which is, you never know what effect your leadership is going to have on the people that you're leading. And then he talks about legacy. What are you going to leave behind? And I think I'm just expanding on this because this here really, by looking at these words in the middle, really enables us to get an understanding of what sport stands for in this particular context. And all of our contexts are different. So I think it's about creating a culture. It's about creating a culture of sweeping the sheds. I've got a great example of a head teacher I used to work under who every Monday morning used to put out all the chairs for assembly. He swept the sheds. He was willing to do what needed to be done. And that was his thing. And he loved doing it every Monday morning. I think he learned that from here, actually. One that I often struggle with, I'm originally a PE teacher and now I'm a head teacher, is using the data that we get given. We generate thousands and thousands of items of data, and it's how we use them. So for the next few bits, I'm going to focus on people who are far better at expressing this than me and have far better knowledge of these things, and sort of lead you into some of their thoughts about how they have arrived at the positions that they are in. Now, Roberto Martinez, as you know, is the football manager of Belgium. He is also the sporting technical director for Belgium, and he was the topic of a documentary recently on the BBC. Belgium's a country of only 11 million people, and they consistently do very, very well at sport. And I'm going to play you a small clip of Roberto Martinez explaining how he uses data.
We always need data. Data in football is essential. But data in other sports, probably they make decisions. In football, data doesn't make decisions, supports the decision. And that's what's essential, to have data as in the perfect context. Football is a low-scoring game, so data without context means nothing. But this is the way to start the day. We created the dashboards that they are essential. Straight away, you can see in this corner all our players that we follow. If it's green, there's nothing to worry about. If it's a yellow, it's something that we need to interrogate. If it is a red, it's a moment that we need to try to find and almost look at the player in question. Jeremy had 16 caps with the under-17s before he moved to the under-21s. He had a very short period because his development was very, very strong in the last year.
That's a big difference, I think, from when I first came here to some of the work Roberto's done. That department, the analytics department, is really growing. And it's been a big benefit for us, yeah.
Er worden in heel veel clubs data verzameld en data gestockeerd, waar uiteindelijk weinig of niets mee gebeurt. Bij Roberto, en dat is een duidelijke vraag die hij aan het datadepartement en ook aan mij stelt, van zorg ervoor dat alle data die we binnenkrijgen, dat we daar effectief iets kunnen mee doen. Wat kan Roberto met het aantal gelopen kilometers, met het aantal versnellingen van Eden Hazard? Wat kan hij daarmee?
You should never have to go find the information. I don't think a coach should have to wait for information like that. They've got too much to worry about, too many things they need to do. Should be able to walk in, click on the dashboard and just get that information quick and fast.
Ik denk dat Roberto Martinez daarmee bewijst dat hij een moderne coach is. Ik denk dat coaches die nu nog beslissingen nemen puur vanuit het buikgevoel, dat je die aan de top nog maar weinig gaat vinden. Kan al wel een keer gebeuren en in een wedstrijd. Maar dat je beslissingen neemt op basis van data, die vaak een ander verhaal vertellen dan de perceptie.
I think that's incredible. Looking at how Roberto Martinez, who was the Wigan manager that beat Man City in the FA Cup final all those years ago, that data is what he uses to make many of his decisions. And data doesn't make the decisions. In fact, he says it supports the decisions. And he says that you also need the context around the data, otherwise it doesn't mean anything. And I think we are showered with data. You know, I think one of the gentlemen there who was speaking was saying there's so much data that is out there that we don't use all of it. So I think a lesson for me from Roberto Martinez, who's clearly very, very good at his job, and within sport, is what data am I generating in school? What data am I using? Is it generating data for data's sake, or is it because it is helping and guiding and supporting us in making the decisions around the young people in our care, or supporting staff? So how many data drops do I have a year? What do I do with that data? Is it just to report home, or is it actually to impact the teaching and learning, or to direct the progress of a curriculum, or maybe to pause a curriculum and go revisit stuff? Do we have the freedom to use the data that we generate, or the data that we've given, to really guide us? I think one thing that's a struggle at the moment is that when we get our primary school children come through to secondary school, that we have very limited data, or at least consistent data. So how are we using what we are being given to intervene with those year sevens post-COVID? How are we enabling the young people to get the support that they need? And it's data. It's either the data we produce or the data that we're given. And I think that quote, that the data doesn't make decisions, it supports decisions. So if we know a direction that we want to go, and using the data, does the data support that decision in the direction that we want to go? I find that fascinating. Roberto Martinez. I think the next point I want to bring up is knowing the details. You know, the details of what we're doing and how we're making decisions and where we're going. And I think David Brailsford, who was the coach of Team GB Cycling, he spoke about a couple of concepts. He spoke about marginal gains and the extra 1%. And just for a couple of minutes, I think we should hear what he says around looking at the details and using those details to refine, to change, to develop.
The demands of the event we want to win. So we really figure out what would it take to win whatever it is we want to win. We then prioritise, because you can't win everything. You know, you will lose more than you win, that's for sure. So decide what we want to win and when. And then we work back to where we are today and look at the gap between where we are today and what we want to win, and create a plan and execute it.
Now, I know you're all about marginal gains. Just explain to me what that means. What are the tiny details that you look for when you're coaching?
Well, the whole principle of marginal gains came from the idea that if you broke down everything that could impact on a cycling performance, absolutely everything you could think of, and then you improved every little thing by 1%, when you clump it all together, you're going to get quite a significant increase in performance. So we set about looking at everything we could. I mean, some things are fundamental, like fitness, nutrition, biomechanics, etc. But there are other things which might seem, right on the periphery, but very, very important. So, posture when you sleep, having the right pillow, having the same pillow, so you don't sleep on different pillows all the time when you move from hotel to hotel in training. Hygiene is extremely important, and so how do you generally know how to clean your hands? And when you wash your hands, if you just ask people to wash their hands, there's always, if you put down in a mask, there's little bits between the hands and at the base of the thumb here, which always people don't wash. So if you can go all those things, you're going to get ill a little bit less. And they're all little things, but if you clump them all together, you improve.
How on earth did you factor in the Tour de France to start with, and then coming into the Olympics? Because anybody looking at that on paper would think that's bonkers. You'll never do both. You'll never be successful in both arenas.
Well, you weren't alone in thinking that. It was an ambitious project to start the Team Sky.
So we're gonna pause it there. We don't need to listen to the whole video, but he talks about those marginal gains. everything that can impact the success. They knew what their goal was. They knew the amount of golds they wanted to win. They knew which athletes they wanted to win those gold medals. And then they had to figure out a way if they were going to do it. You know, there's stories about the way that the helmets are made and the way that the bikes have changed, and even the fact that the way they clip their feet onto the pedals. Now, I don't have answers for this, but my question is, you know, what are the marginal gains in helping develop your leaders? For example, your staff. Are there certain conditions that you need to have? Is it having the same pillow every night? Is it making sure, as he is expressing, the hygiene so you don't get ill as often? What are those things in our schools that will help our staff perform at an optimum level? And what are those small things that will help our students perform at an optimal level as well? Maybe it's having clear boundaries around certain things. Maybe it's having a freedom in other areas. Maybe it's that everybody knows exactly where to go to get their leave of absence form, so they don't have to go looking for it. Is it taking away those difficulties? One example I once heard was a young man used to come into a lesson often, and there was always conflict around having the right equipment. So the teacher took that conflict away so that that young man could just learn, and had equipment ready to loan him. And I think they gave him his bus pass or something every day. But he had the equipment, and at the end of the lesson, he'd get his bus pass back if he handed all the equipment back. But that took away conflict. It took away something that would probably prevent that young man from learning. And I think having those 1% increments, you know, David Brailsford in another area talks about if everybody improves 1% a day, after 100 days, you've improved 100%. If we manage to change little things in the way that we manage things, maybe it's, you know, not having briefing 3 times a week, but only having it twice a week, giving the staff an extra 5 minutes here and there for different meetings. Maybe it's a one-way system in the school, because if it's not one way, there's conflict, which then causes young people not to learn because they're distracted. So there's so many different ways we can think about those marginal gains within our different settings. The next area is having no limits, and the next athlete and leader in sport really inspires me, actually. And I think it's not setting limits on yourself. So not limiting yourself, saying, oh, we're in this area of the country, or I have children with this prior attainment, or my staff really aren't engaged in this. It's not setting limits for yourself. It's sort of releasing those shackles to enable yourself to achieve, as a school and the young people and the staff, whatever you want to achieve. And that is quite dramatic, I think, when you make that decision. And Tanni Grey-Thompson, who won so many medals at Olympics and World Championships for in a wheelchair, and she talks about not having any limits, and hearing it from her is inspiring.
I believe no human is limited. My interpretation of the word limit is what everyone else tells you can't do, not what you think you can do. And I think it's always about challenging that and being creative and ignoring the people who say you shouldn't or can't do things. When I hear the word limit, it reminds me of my childhood, where I became a wheelchair user. And this whole group of people lined up to tell my parents about all the things that I would never do in my life because I was a wheelchair user. So I'd never be an athlete, I'd never. And for me, it was about deciding what I wanted to do and figuring out the best way to make that happen. I was about 6 when I became paralysed. It happened very slowly. My spine collapsed, didn't miss a day of school, didn't hurt. I just gradually stopped being able to do things. So for me, it was always a hugely positive thing. So I think from a young age, the limits other people set on me and put on me, I just learned to ignore them. And as a 6-year-old, it's not that big, but my world suddenly felt like I had the chance to do absolutely anything I wanted, and there wasn't going to be anything to stop me. I did want to show that you can be a wheelchair user and be an athlete. You know, for about the first 10 years I competed, people used to say to me, do you train? Yes. And that was really annoying. A big part of it was about challenging those limitations and saying, just because I'm in a wheelchair, it doesn't mean to say I can't do things. And I actually just fell into athletics. I started wheelchair racing when I was 12, and then I didn't win a race for years. I competed at 5 Paralympic Games, from Seoul to Athens, and I won 11 golds, 4 silvers, and 1 bronze medal. It's really important for me to encourage other people to think about the limits that other people have placed on them, to say to them, you know, if you want to do something, you know, try. Don't be afraid to try. Because if you're afraid to try, you'll never know what you can achieve. I believe Elliot can run the marathon in under 2 hours because he knows what it takes. You know, he knows how to push himself to his limits. There's a great team around him. You know, the course, hopefully the weather, you know, it's those people who believe in him. In this, it's him against the clock. And he just has to concentrate on pushing his limits to the absolute max. With a marathon, so much of it is mental. It pushes you beyond your limits. Whoever you are, it can be incredible, but it's a really cruel distance as well. Once the 2 hour limit goes, I think it will move men's racing on to just extraordinary lengths. Who sets the limits anyway? What is your story?
I think that's a really good phrase at the end. Who sets the limits anyway? And I think this is probably what I learned most from sport, that there are no limits. And to not be limited by anybody around you or anything that's dictated to you. There's a couple of things that Tanni Grey-Thompson said there, which was, you know, that there's people who believe in you. You know, and sometimes you have to rely on those outside of education to believe in what you're trying to achieve, but also those within. You know, and other things that she sort of touched on. Are you enabling change, or are you limiting it? You know, are you enabling the people around you to do what they can do and are able to do, or are you limiting them by different constraints that you put in place? And that sort of comes along with, you know, do you sort of challenge those around you to be even better? There's a great phrase by Dylan William, the great educationalist, which is teachers need to improve not because they're not good enough, but because they can be even better. You know, we can change that word teachers for anything. Head teachers need to improve, not because they're not good enough, but because they can be better. Or leaders need to improve, not because they're not good enough, but because they can be even better. You know, Tanni Grey-Thompson, you know, had high expectations and aspirations for herself, and she achieved them. The amount of medals that she won. And I think when we look at that in education, what goal, what aspirations and expectations do we set for ourselves and our communities that we are leaders in? And how are we going to go about achieving them? You know, there's something in sport that Tanni Grey-Thompson there is, it's about training, that there's a cycle through the year of training really hard and preparing for competition. And then you have to have periods where you don't train as much and then you pick it back up again. And I think there's something for us to look at in our school year about how we sort of peak and trough with certain things that we're trying to do. But I think some things that need to stay consistent are what we spoke about at the very beginning, was having a clear goal of what you want to achieve, your vision, but also enabling those around you to achieve, not putting limits on them. You know, I worked for another head that just simply said, go and do whatever you like, pretty much. If it goes wrong, come and tell me, and what are we going to learn from it? Try not to make the same mistake twice, and try and develop it and make it even better next time. Also, we work in communities and environments and schools where things have been done a certain way for a long time. And I think as leaders, we should challenge the way some things are done and not put limits on what we can do just because it's always been done that way. So that was Tanni Grey-Thompson. I think incredible. Any interview with her really, really inspires me. Then the next one is about creating the team. What team do you want around you? What are you going to do with your team? Phil Jackson, I don't know if you know him. He was an American basketball coach. He coached particularly the LA Lakers and the Chicago Bulls with some of the greatest players of all time. And he just talks briefly about competitiveness and bringing a team together and creating something around a team in order for it to achieve. So just listen to him for a couple of minutes as part of an interview. I am hoping.
Phil, if you could talk about is just how to kind of use mindfulness with competitiveness, with this desire to win. And I think, you know, working with Kobe and Michael Jordan, I mean, you've worked with probably two of the most competitive people that I know in the basketball arena and others. How do you balance that energies out? Like, and I know there's a lot of parents out there that see competitiveness in their kids and they want to encourage it, but they also want to manage it. And I'm curious how you navigate that terrain.
Well, there's an instance that I can talk about that I think lends some light to what we're saying. In the seventh game of a series against the Boston Celtics in the last championship that I was part of, I think 2010 was that Celtic-Laker championship run, and we have a seventh game. And Kobe was so geared up in that game that he was trying to do it all by himself. And he, as the game went on, I don't know if he was 3 for 14 at halftime. And I think he ended up being like 6 for 25 or 7 for 25 for the game, shooting wise. And nothing would fall, nothing would go right for him. And he would come back to the bench and he'd be frustrated. And we'd say, just get in the system. All you have to do is just join the rest of the team, find your way into the system and be part of it. And things will start turning out right. We went down by 14 points at some point in the end of the third or beginning of the fourth quarter. And he has accepted it, that it wasn't going to be about his own desire, will, power, and exceptionalism. It was going to be about doing the thing together as a group and being part of the team and getting in the system. And he did that, and it led to the victory, which was close fought.
I think that's fascinating. Probably one of the greatest basketball players of all time, Kobe Bryant, and trying to do it all himself. And Phil Jackson there, his coach, says, you know, it's better just get in the system, do it with the team, do it together. And I think we find ourselves as leaders often trying to do it all ourselves. The reason many of us are leaders in education is because we're good at doing stuff. And then when you get to a certain level of leadership, you have to do less. And you have to enable your team to do it. And you have to just come alongside them and help them and support them. And I think Phil Jackson, he wrote a great book that I'll be highlighting in just a bit called 11 Rings, which is quite a heavy book to read. But he just outlines his approach, you know, of enabling all those around the key players to support them and then allowing the key players to just sink in to a system or the process of how they played that particular sport, which was basketball. Fascinating. The next one is probably my favorite one that I'm going to show you, and that's managing the talent. You know, on my senior team alone, I have colleagues who are way better at teaching than me, far better at using data, far better at managing HR issues and all those things. However, they need to be managed. And I asked a friend of mine if she'd be willing to talk about managing the talent. And this is Kate Alder. Kate's going to introduce herself, but Kate's the captain for Wasps, Women's Ladies Rugby Club. Tremendous rugby player in her own right. But I think even more than a rugby player, she's an absolutely tremendous captain. She manages a team full of internationals, whereas she currently isn't an international, but she's also a standout player. So let's listen to her about managing talent. And this is a bit longer than the other ones because I think she says it far better than I ever will.
Hi, my name's Kate. I am the captain of Wasps ladies rugby team based over in West London. I've been part of the squad for about 6 years now, and I've captained the team for the last 4. So in terms of a bit of background, so I play in the centres. I've not got as much international experience as a lot of the players that I captain. We've got Olympians who are on their way to the Olympics now. We've got World Cup superstars. We've got international players from Ireland, from Wales, from England. So we've got a really high standard of players playing at Wasps, and I'm potentially considered a bit more of a club player. I've represented England Sevens twice in the kind of development side of things, but in terms of being a full paid contracted athlete for my country, I don't sit on that side of the fence. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about managing talent, especially I think as my position where I'm managing players who are representing their country, who are playing at the very highest flight of international women's rugby. How do I go about managing that talent and getting the best out of the squad from my position as a captain? So I had a really good think about it. There are a couple of things that really stood out from my leadership approach and the way that I like to captain over at Wasps, and it actually comes from our coach, so Giselle Mathers, who's incredible. One of the things that she reiterates to us every single year is know yourself and know your teammates, and that's not just as a player. So as a squad, we do a hell of a lot of team building, and I don't just mean going out for a few drinks or, bonding together on the pitch. But we've done pre-season tours to the Alps. We have climbed up mountains blindfolded. We have had to learn poems and plays and perform them at altitude. We've done alpine biathlons, you name it, and we've done it. But it's about actually understanding what people's character are, because a rugby player can be very different to you as a person. So Kate as a rugby player and Kate as an individual can be quite different. And it's so important to fully understand your teammates. And if you want to be able to get the best out of them, you've got to understand what makes them tick. You've got to understand what motivates them, what excites them, what makes them feel comfortable. So one of the big things about leadership that we bang on all the time is know yourself. So I need to know what my limits are. I need to know when I'm going to need to lean on them as players and as friends, but also know your teammates. So it's so important to understand people's backgrounds, people's personalities, people's ticks, so that as a leader, you can tailor your approach dependent on the individual because you know them. And not because you know them as a rugby player or as a student or as a colleague, but you know them as a person. You understand what their values are, you understand what they stand for. And we've had amazing results based on this know yourself, know your teammates theory and kind of value that we build our team on. So 100% that's something that I live by as a captain. The second thing that I think makes good leadership in terms of managing the multitude of talent that we've got in our squad is quality time. And that's quality time with every single person in your team. So whether you are new to rugby this year, whether you have been playing international rugby for the last 6 years, I make it my mission to spend time with that individual. Because again, it comes back to knowing yourself and knowing your teammates. But it's very easy to graduate towards bigger characters or people who've played rugby at a better level. It's very easy to try and surround yourself with those personalities. But a squad, a team, and as a leader, it's important that you show quality time and respect and interest to every single person that you are trying to lead. Because if you show them that quality time and you invest in them and you sit and you listen and you give them that undivided attention, that bond between yourself as a leader and a player, or a leader and a follower, I find personally gets so much stronger because they believe that you care about their interests. They believe that you're invested in what they want to do. So quality time, whether it be on the coach to an away game or whether it be sitting eating food after a game or partnering up with somebody different in the gym, I think it's so important as a person to be valued, and as a leader, if you can show that you value them through these little ways, whether it's partnering with them in a drill, whether it's spending a little bit more time with them after a drill because you've noticed, because you know them, that they're maybe not quite where they want to be. So the second thing is quality time. And the third, I think, is don't be afraid to show vulnerability and compassion as a leader. There have been loads of times and loads of instances where I've had to lean on my teammates, and I think that strengthens a bond between a leader and a follower. There's been times, like I said, in the Alps, we've had some horrendous sessions, training in Richmond. There've been times in my personal life as well that I've needed to lean on them. And I think don't be afraid to show that vulnerability. Don't be afraid to show that you're just like them. You struggle with the same things, you enjoy the same things, because again, it's all about creating this bond of trust and this bond of values and saying, I've got your back and you've got mine. And as soon as you start to strengthen that bond, they will do anything that you need of them, whether it be in an educational setting, whether it be in a sports setting. So the third for me is don't be afraid to be you, have weaknesses, show vulnerability, remind them that you are exactly the same, you struggle with the same things, you enjoy the same things, but show that real character. Because again, kind of bringing it back round to know yourself and know your teammates, I want them to know me. I want them to know when I'm going to need them. I want them to know what my strengths and weaknesses are. So don't be afraid to show that vulnerability and compassion. And I think if you can harness those three things, so understanding your teammates, showing them quality time and genuinely spending good time with them, and showing them your vulnerabilities and that you're the same as them, I think it starts to become a lot easier to manage talent, and you get everybody on the same page, working on the same values towards the same goal.
I think that's tremendous, what Kate has said there and the way she's expressed herself. Those three things about managing your talent, managing those that are probably better at certain things than you are, know yourself and get to know them. Spend quality time with each of them, and then show your compassion and vulnerability. I think those are really powerful messages that we can take from sport. And I think that's when you look at the very best teams, I think one thing that's always expressed on television or on the radio or wherever is They seem to be like a big family. They seem to be really cohesive. You know, families fight and bicker and disagree with each other, but at the end of the day, they all come together and work in the right direction. I think one thing that I really want to dwell on, what Kate has just gone through there, is, you know, being yourself and showing compassion and vulnerability. And I'm going to show some recent cases of this that I think just highlight what a powerful medium sport is in demonstrating and showing us really quality leadership. I'm sure you remember this from the European Championships when Christian Eriksen, the Danish footballer, had a heart attack on the pitch. Look at that team on the screen there. The captain, who's in the middle, number 4, I don't quite know how to pronounce his surname, I think it's Kjaer. He got his teammates around, all his teammates around Christian, and he made them face outwards to protect him, and he faced inwards. He looked at the need. He saw the need. And then after he saw that, he actually went and found Christian Eriksen's wife to console her and to give her comfort. But the team were outward looking at everything going on around them, protecting. And he, as the leader, was looking at the problem and looking at the issue. I think that's a really powerful image, and probably one that I will go to for a very long time. I think this image of Marcus Rashford, a very young man who is just showing integrity and showing what it means to be a young man in today's society who fights for what is right. He has suffered at the hands of online trolls and all sorts recently for various reasons. But this young man has campaigned for underprivileged children, disadvantaged children, to get free school meals through the holidays. That's incredible. He's 22 and he's campaigning for children up and down the country. It's heroic, but that's what he wants to do. He is using his position in sport to enable that to happen. Tremendous character, tremendous compassion. I think this image from the same football championships, on the image in the top left-hand corner, is Gareth Southgate as a leader. I don't think we can deny our experience of what we witnessed during the European Championships, of a leader who brought a group of people together, most probably because he got to know them, most probably because he spent time with each of them, and most probably because he showed compassion and vulnerability. You know, giving that young man who missed that final penalty a massive hug and consoling him. I think that is showing your human side, showing that you care, showing who you are. I think too often in leadership we forget that we have that in our arsenal. You know, he was just himself at that point, I think, Gareth Southgate, and not trying to be anybody else. I think Michael Jordan is somebody very different. He didn't show a lot of compassion or a lot of vulnerability, but what he was the whole time was himself. He was relentless in his pursuit of excellence. You know, if his teammates didn't quite match up to them, he'd tell them. If they weren't doing what he wanted them to do, he'd tell them, but he'd bring them with him. And all the players around him became better players because of his relentless pursuit for excellence. And that was who he was. That was who he was. He couldn't change who he was, and he just stayed himself. I think the final person I want to highlight, and I had to highlight a rugby player, being a massive rugby fan, is Doddy Weir. Doddy Weir is suffering from motor neurons disease, and he's raising a huge amount of money along with Rob Burrows, who's a rugby league player as well, who's suffering from motor neurons disease, to raise awareness, but also to seek cures. And he was a tremendous athlete, and I think the outpouring of support just demonstrates how quiet leadership, how being with those teammates around you and guiding them and bringing them on through your who you are and not changing who you are, can really demonstrate being successful. And you look at all those 5 images there, and they're all very different, but I do think there's tremendous leadership that we can learn from sport there. I mean, I could talk about this forever. I could talk about the personal experience of great leaders. I could talk about the documentaries that you can watch on Netflix, The Last Chance U, which is, you know, these college, university, these community colleges in the States that try and give unbelievable young athletes an opportunity to make the big time, or high schools that give communities hope, or even local football teams and local rugby teams that are a place of community and a home for many, many people up and down this country. But it's because of certain people who lead and guide using these principles of what I've spoken about. These principles of creating a culture, of using data, of having a very clear goal, of doing everything that you need to do to be successful, of not to be limited, of managing the talent. I think the last thing I'd like to sort of express to you is don't sit still, read, find out about these leaders in sport. And there's many books out there. These are 4 books, 3 that I've read and 1 that I'm really looking forward to reading. The Captain Class was written by a guy called Sam Walker. He established the sports section on the Wall Street Journal. It never had a sports section, but he established it, and he's written a couple of books. This book is about 13 teams that were the best ever, or at least the best during their era. And it's a tremendous book about leadership and about managing talent, about creating cultures. Legacy, I expressed to you before about the All Blacks. Phil Jackson's book, 11 Rings. When you win a championship in the States, you get a ring. He won 11 of them. And then one on the right is by Will Greenwood. Will Greenwood is a Rugby World Cup winning player. He's a tremendous guy, very focused. But he's written a book recently, How to Lead, Learn and Grow Like a Champion. I'm really looking forward to reading that when it comes out on the 1st of September. So there's loads for us to learn from sport. And I think for my final reflection, I'd just like to encourage you to, when you're watching sport next time, maybe not necessarily watch what's going on with the ball or the hockey puck or the rugby ball, basketball, but watch the people on the side and see what they're doing and see how they're like conductors of an orchestra. Not because everybody's hanging on their word, but because they know enough to enable everybody to be their best. They know each individual well enough to help them achieve their own personal goals, which will help them achieve the goals that you have as a whole group of people, whether that be at department level, senior leadership level, school or trust level. So many different things we can learn from sport, and I could talk about them all day, but I'll leave the rest for you to read. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Real sort of a great kind of overview of a range of different sports and how obviously we can kind of introduce that into education. And I think kind of touching on a few points, which I think personally for me, with the sort of the Euros and some of the stuff that came out of that, the really sort of exemplary sort of leadership attributes that were shown kind of at all levels as well, both in terms of management, but equally the players and team leaders themselves. So, Andrew, we've got a couple of questions that come in I want to sort of pose to you. So we'll go with Craig's question first. So Craig's asked, or sort of said, he hasn't had as much time as he would like in handling data at the early stages of his career. And with it being so important, I think, reflecting on, obviously, I think Roberto Martinez's bits and pieces he was saying, how is it that he could get better in terms of using data in his school? Have you got any points on that?
Yeah, Craig, that's a great question. I'm a PE teacher at heart, right? And I ended up being a head of department, and then I ended up being assistant head in charge of data. And that was probably the one job that I never actually sort of strove for. It just ended up in my lap. And it started with the very basics. So getting to know the class that I was responsible for and what data I generated and how I can manipulate that data and how I can use that data. So even if it's just my single class, and I don't know what subject you teach, Craig, but if it's, let's say, a class in front of you, just knowing what their prior attainment is and then how that might influence what you do with them, finding small bits of data that enable you to help them make progress and then keeping track of it. So I got really good at Excel. Just so you know, I love playing with Excel and making formulas and equations. And when you change one thing, it changes the other. So I think you start small and then eventually all data. I know, you know, after the recent tags and CAGs and everything that we've been doing, you get used to dealing with 1,000 bits of data, and it's exactly the same as dealing with 5 bits of data, actually, just on a grander scale. So get really good at knowing how to manipulate and create some data and have fun with it. You know, I used to love making charts and all that stuff and seeing how it looked and then what that would mean they'd need to achieve to go to the next grain boundary and all that. So just start with your classes and then you can work from there.
I think that kind of is almost that marginal gain idea, I think, in terms of start small, a little bit, get better, getting better. I think it's good. Another one, I think this is going to be an interesting question. I'm curious as from Chris. So how can we encourage a team member who is ambitious and wants to do it all, themselves to perhaps release a little bit of responsibility to their team. So I guess whether this is a managing sideways or even perhaps managing upwards.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question.
That's a brilliant question. I think there's many ways I can go into it. And it's not so much from sport. I think Kate, the captain from Wasps FC, who, by the way, is tremendous. She's a good friend, but she's tremendous. I think she expressed it really well. It's getting to know, encouraging that team member to get to know everybody else. I have also found more recently that if you have really effective mechanisms of delegation, and delegation isn't just getting people to do stuff that you don't have time to do. It's enabling them to do the job better than you. So this colleague of yours who's really ambitious is probably pretty good at what they do. All teachers are doers, but when you get to a certain level of leadership, you can't do everything. So, just really simply encourage them to work with their team members. And if there's things that their team members do really well, just let them crack on with it. They don't impact them directly. And then you can, if it's something bigger, that they model how they want it to be achieved, and they can come alongside them and meet with them less frequently. And then there's some things that probably you need to do some training on around capacity. As well. I think we have limited capacity, particularly when we're teaching loads of lessons and we've got meetings after school and we've got things like this, and we've got to prepare for our holidays and all the rest of it as well. But I think there's some really clear strategies, and more than willing to, Chris, if you ever want to get in touch, to talk through some really clever delegating strategies that are nothing to do with me. It's just stuff I've read and stuff that appears to be working in the different environments that I work in. Yeah.
Perfect, brilliant. I think that probably is a conversation that kind of steers towards Twitter, and it might well be obviously just to kind of reiterate and echo obviously that we'll get out Twitter handles and so forth as well, so people can engage and get into these communications. I'm just going to give people a reminder and a chance, obviously, if they want to ask any further questions. We've got one more question come in, which I'll come to in a second. But again, this is recorded. It will be up on our YouTube page in the near future, obviously, for those who want to kind of re-engage with this, and feel free to reach out via Twitter. Our very own Sufyan's really keen to know, Andrew, from sort of your experience of sports leadership, and equally within that, what's the single most important thing that we can transfer from sports leadership into education?
That's a great question, Sufyan. I think failure. Actually, I think every athlete learns about failure. And every leader in sport learns about failure. So in sports psychology, there's sort of two extremes of types of people. There's those that need to achieve and those that need to avoid failure. And you can kind of find yourself somewhere on that spectrum. I'm definitely a need to achieve person. I'll make mistakes daily, but I'll hopefully learn from them and not make them again. So I think we can learn failure. And I think one of the people who was interviewed, not everybody is successful all the time. It was Tanny Gray-Thompson, I think. We all make mistakes, we all fail, but hopefully, actually it was David Brailsford, you fail more than you're successful. So you have to learn from failure. And I think with sports leaders, particularly when you're working with athletes who inevitably at elite sport, they're all really good in their own right. And they're probably far better athletes than you ever were. Just like there are teachers that I lead in my school who are far better teachers than I ever was and ever will be. And I'm learning from them daily, but it's harnessing that. It's enabling them to make some mistakes in order that they can improve and become better. That phrase from Dylan William, I use it the whole time. Teachers need to improve not because they're not good enough, but because they can be even better. The day we say that we've done it and we've completed it is probably the day we need to quit doing our job, because we feel like we have nothing else to learn. Tanny Gray-Thompson spoke about the 2-hour marathon runner that was just achieved recently, actually. It was always thought that it was impossible, and the Kenyan tried, and now he's achieved it by creating the right circumstances and the right environment. So I think it's failure. I think that's a massive thing that I can learn, actually.
I think it's a really interesting point. I think obviously it kind of seemed almost that theme through all of the sort of people you'd spoken about and had sort of video clips, that humility and that ability to kind of accept and be human. I think failure is a really interesting one to look at in order to succeed, that failure is something that we have to accept, I guess, in that respect. So yeah, really, really poignant sort of part there. So I think in terms of questions, we've had no more further questions come in at this stage. Obviously, like we say, there will be sort of engagement and communication that goes forward through Twitter and so forth. So massive thank you, Andrew. I know obviously time is precious at any given time, so it's really, really handy to hear from yourself and obviously how we can introduce sort of leadership through sport into our educational settings as well. And I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of thoughts and ideas shared going forward as well. So I want to say a massive thank you for your time today.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute
Brilliant.
pleasure.
So again, just to remind you, this session has been recorded. Will be up on our YouTube page fairly shortly, and we'll get some conversation going through Twitter. Feel free to follow us at Chiltern Teaching School Hub. You'll find that we'll share sort of Andrew's Twitter on there as well, and by all means, reach out and pick his brain if you've got any further questions. Have a good evening, guys.